FIU Student Performance webinar. It's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to get started very promptly. We have a wonderful presentation set up for you today. I've seen it before we got started. This is Sherry Garmise, Vice President for the USU APLU Office of Urban Initiatives, and I'm just going to very quickly go through the housekeeping that we need for the webinar. Quickly, obviously, you're connected to the visual portion. Make sure you're connected to the audio via telephone call-in. We will start at 1 o'clock. Next slide, please. Only the presenters will be able to be heard. Everyone else will be muted. If you have any questions, we invite you to send them in the chat box in your the corner of your screen. We will be collecting them, so you can write them during the presentation, and then we'll be reading them aloud at the end, or you can hold off to the end as you choose. Next slide, please, Adrian. Okay, so with that, that's the basic of the thing. So if you have questions, put it in the chat box. With that, I'm actually going to be passing the baton to Dr. Irma Becerra-Fernandez, who is the Vice President for Engagement at Florida International University, who's going to be just kicking it off. Irma?
The opportunity to, okay. Thank you, Dr. Garmise, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce today's facilitator, Dr. Betty Bottoms. I wanted to briefly, before I introduce Dr. Bottoms, welcome all of you on behalf of President Rosenberg, who chairs the Student Performance Strand. He's a president of FIU, and he's really taking on the initiative to bring all the urban serving institutions that have an interest in how we can improve student performance. And we all share the passion for improving student performance and graduation rates. So this is really a wonderful opportunity because among all of us, we have a great intellectual assets and great success, like we'll hear today with this wonderful webinar that has been organized by Dr. Bottoms. Dr. Bottoms is the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs and the Dean of the Honors College and Professor of Psychology at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's currently spearheading UIC's unprecedented effort to improve undergraduate success. And Dr. Bottoms is the co-chair of the Student Success Planning Initiative Steering Committee, which has been tasked with developing a comprehensive plan to improve student retention and graduation rates. Dr. Bottoms also founded the Chicago Collaborative for Undergraduate Success, which is a coalition of all Chicago universities with the goal of sharing best practices and data to increase undergraduate success throughout the city. Dr. Bottoms is a fellow of the American Psychological Association, and she has received several awards, including the Salim Shaw Early Career Award, the Today's Chicago Woman Foundation Rising Star Award for Career and Community Contributions, and 9 university and national awards for excellence in graduate and undergraduate teaching and mentoring. Betty, we are certainly proud to be your friend and your colleague, and thank you so much for all your efforts. And to the rest of the audience today, please help me welcome Dr. Betty Bottoms.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Irma, for that very kind introduction. And welcome to everyone who's on this webinar. If you're watching the webinar, then you all know that nationwide college completion rates are not high enough. And you're here because you care about fixing that problem. There are a wide range of things we should be doing on our campuses to increase student success, from improving advising and simplifying curricula to targeting financial aid more effectively, and everything in between. Today's webinar addresses one intervention that, if done right, could be one of many effective tools that we can use to increase student success on our college campuses. So today you're going to learn from Professors Mary Murphy and Greg Walton about an intervention based on the social psychological theory that increasing a student's sense of social belonging and acceptance, sometimes in the very smallest ways, has the potential to increase their success in college. Mary and Greg are going to review this promising field of research for you. Then they're going to present the results of research with freshmen here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. You're going to learn about a very simple intervention intended to decrease students' sense of psychological threat on campus by taking the social adversity that new students feel so vividly and framing it as a common experience and one that gets better over time for all students. I guess I'll say that every day we administrators and staff do many, many things to increase student success. I want to note that this intervention is unique in being an intervention, yet also a carefully controlled research study. Unique in testing cutting-edge social psychological theory, and unique in modeling a perfect partnership between faculty, administrators, and staff to research and then to use a promising evidence-based student success tool. So let me tell you a little bit about Greg and Mary and introduce them, and then I'll hand it to Greg. So Dr. Greg Walton is an assistant professor of psychology at Stanford, where he did his undergraduate work. He did his PhD at Yale. After graduate school, he worked for a year as a fellow in the office of Senator Hillary Clinton and then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Waterloo. Much of his research investigates psychological processes that contribute to major social problems and how what he calls wise and sometimes very simple interventions that target these processes can help address such problems. You may have heard him interviewed last year on National Public Radio about the one-hour intervention he developed with Jeffrey Cohen that bolsters students' feelings of social belonging in the transition to college, which forms the basis for what you'll hear today. Dr. Mary Murphy earned her bachelor's from the University of Texas at Austin and PhD from Stanford. After a postdoctoral fellowship at Northwestern, she became an assistant professor here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. But in 2012, she was cruelly lured away from us to become an assistant professor of psychology at Indiana University, where she is now. Her research focuses on developing and testing theories about how people's social identities and group memberships, such as gender and race, interact with the context they encounter to affect people's thoughts, feelings, motivations, and performance. Some of her work in particular has focused on implications for underrepresented women in STEM fields. So thanks so very much to Mary Murphy and Greg Walton for being with us today, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, so people should see, this is Greg Walton here, and I think you can see my screen. I think you can see my screen now. And I would just wanted to begin by saying it is a real pleasure to talk with you and to work together, I hope, on a common problem that we all care about, which is improving students' experiences coming to college and helping kids, especially students from less advantaged backgrounds, to succeed in college. So I look forward to getting to know all of you. Mary and I both look forward to getting to know all of you more, and we hope to working together to pursue these goals. I want to thank Betty for her very kind introduction and all of the organizers for bringing us together. So our work begins with the idea that when students come to college, they have certain kinds of worries or questions that rise to the top of their minds that they ask themselves. These questions are questions like, do I belong? Can I do it? And does it matter? And these are the sort of broad level versions of the questions, but they also have a very specific kind of frame. So when students ask themselves, do I belong, they might really be asking themselves a more specific question like, when I feel lonely or disrespected, when the other students in my dorm go out to dinner and they don't invite me along, when I get criticized, does that event mean that I don't belong in general in school? When students ask themselves, can I do it, they're also asking themselves very specific questions in situations in school. Questions like, when the work is really hard, when I'm taking an intro chem class, does that mean that I can't do it, that I've reached my quote-unquote natural limits? And when the work is boring or challenging or difficult, does that mean that there's no reason to try? Does that mean that there's no broader purpose to working hard in school and to potentially learning the foundational skills that might matter later in life? What social psychology and research in educational psychology has found in the past few years is that is something I think really remarkable both scientifically and for education, which is that short exercises that help students answer these kinds of questions in productive ways can be really beneficial for students, especially at-risk students, and raise their achievement over time. So the social belonging intervention that we'll talk about today answers that question about belonging. And the answer it gives is to say everybody worries at first about whether they belong, but eventually they come to feel at home. So that means that if your friends go out without you and they don't invite you along, it doesn't mean that you don't belong in general. It's just part of the normal difficulties of coming to college. Second, growth mindset of intelligence interventions developed by my colleague Carol Dweck and by others show students that what it means to struggle in school, when you're really pushing your abilities, when you're really pushing against hard work and you're trying to understand something that's difficult, that means that you're learning, not that you've reached your limit. That struggles is a sign that you're learning, not that you've reached some inherent limit on your abilities, and that it is through struggle that you can grow your intelligence. Finally, purpose interventions, which Mary will talk about later as well, communicate to students that even when schoolwork is boring, that work can help you achieve a higher purpose, like to become the kind of person you want to be. Now, what's remarkable is that short exercises, really short exercises like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes delivered online, can affect these processes for students, can help students understand issues of belonging, issues of ability, issues of purpose in more adaptive ways and raise their achievement months and even years later. Now, people hear about this and they often think, these things must be magic. How could they possibly work? They must be magic. Well, they're not magic. Some people think that they're magic tricks, and so they can't be real. They can't be a real solution to the systematic problems that we see in education. They couldn't be a real solution to problems of underachievement. And other people, equally misguided, think these are magic bullets. We should scale these things everywhere immediately without delay. Both of these responses are not accurate. What these interventions do is they address particular questions that students have that serve as barriers to their achievement in school. And addressing those questions, removing those barriers, allows that system to unfold in a more successful way. So we can think about this through an analogy of an airplane. It can seem like a great miracle that an airplane lifts off the ground and into the air, this object that weighs many, many tons. And when we think about that, when we ask ourselves the question, what causes the airplane to fly? Well, some things are obvious. There has to be a pilot who's going to make it do things. There's going to have to be engines that make it go forward. And there's going to have to be something called a wing, and we're not maybe quite sure what exactly that does, but it sure seems important. When we look into it a little bit more detail, if we're the Wright brothers exploring the dynamics of lift, we understand that the particular shape of the wing affects the speed of airflow above and below the wing. And that creates this force called lift that can cause the airplane to lift up into the air. So here there's a very subtle factor, but a factor that's essential to the system's success, and that is the shape of the wing. Now, similarly in school, there's lots of forces that are producing more positive outcomes. That is, we often work very, very hard in school to create opportunities for students to learn, to create support systems that help them learn. Teachers and faculty members and parents and students are often motivated for students to do well in school. But there's a subtle factor, a set of subtle factors that can prevent that system from taking off, as it were. And these include these psychological concerns, like worries about belonging, worries about fixed intelligence, worries about stereotypes. Worrying that you don't belong in school can prevent you from being able to take advantage of the resources that are available there to help you learn. So the social belonging intervention is designed to address this particular worry, this worry that maybe I and maybe people like me don't belong in school. It's one that Jeff Cohen, who's a colleague here at Stanford, and I developed several years ago. And it begins sort of with this psychology. This is a woman who wrote a senior thesis at Princeton in the 1980s. And she writes, "My experiences at Princeton have made me far more aware of my blackness than ever before. No matter how liberal and open-minded some of my white professors and classmates try to be toward me, I sometimes feel like a visitor on campus, as if I really don't belong. It often seems as if, to them, I will always be black first and the student second. And here she is writing in her senior thesis at the end of her time at Princeton, and yet she still has this feeling that that people, as if she doesn't really belong, as if people treat her as black first and the student second. Now, who is this woman? It's somebody we all know well. This is our First Lady, Michelle Robinson Obama, writing as Michelle Robinson in 1985. And I think that if students who are as successful and accomplished, who we all, I think, look up to so deeply, as Michelle can have this feeling, then it may be very common indeed. We describe this as a feeling of belonging uncertainty. And the notion is that whenever we go into new social and academic settings, if you take a new job, if you start a new school, we often ask ourselves whether we belong in these settings. Will people like us and respect us? Will they include us? Will they be glad we're there? I think we can all think back on our experiences as college freshmen and the particular times where we were trying to figure out our place in that social world. But when we go into settings where our group is underrepresented and negatively stereotyped, where there's a negative label attached to our group, where there's a kind of group-based reason why maybe we wouldn't belong, then I think people experience that feeling in a much more pervasive way, in a much longer way. And that worry, walking around campus with that question in your mind, a question, I'm not sure whether I belong, it creates ambiguity about the meaning of negative social events. So when something bad happens, if you're already asking yourself, I'm not sure if I belong, I wonder if I belong, I wonder if people are going to value me and respect me here, and then your professor gives you a bunch of critical feedback or blows you off one day, or your RA says something kind of cutting to you, it might feel like it has this general global meaning, mean that you don't belong in general in college. Now, the social belonging intervention is designed in particular to address that inference, to prevent students from making that global inference. It's not designed to make everything hunky-dory. It's not designed to make it the case that your RA never says something cutting, or that your professor always says something supportive, or that you're always invited to dinner. It's designed to help people interpret the inevitable negative things that happen in more positive ways. So the goal is really to prevent students who are at risk in various ways from globalizing negative experiences in school as evidence that they don't belong, from seeing that one comment as meaning they don't belong in general. So it's a new and more hopeful narrative for understanding the adversities that inevitably occur in school. In the intervention, first-year students learned that doubts about belonging in college are common at first and short-lived. They saw some survey statistics, and then they read some quotations that were attributed to a diverse group of junior and senior students. Here's an example. Freshman year, even though I met large numbers of people, I didn't have a small group of close friends. I had to remind myself that making close friends takes time. Since then, I've met people, some of whom are now just as close as my friends in high school were. So this isn't going to blind students to real racism that they experience in school. Instead, it's designed just to take the edge off otherwise ambiguous experiences, like not having a good group of close friends immediately on campus, or having somebody say something negative to you. It's just designed to make those feel like they're happening in the context of this transition to college, and that's why they're occurring. In the study, that message was reinforced with what we call saying is believing techniques. So what happened was that we never told students that they were part of an intervention. We never said that they needed help or we thought they needed help. Instead, we told them that we had gathered some information from upperclassmen, from juniors and seniors, and that we were currently interested in learning more about the college transition. And since they were freshmen going through the transition right then, they were the experts in the college transition. And so we wanted their responses to these materials. And then we told them that what we really wanted to do was to take their responses and give them to freshmen the next year, future freshmen, to help them better understand what the transition to college would be like. So in a sense, we're treating the students who are in the study as co-creators of an intervention, as collaborators in creating an intervention, rather than as recipients of an intervention. So we treated students as benefactors, not beneficiaries. And the experience was not stigmatizing. We weren't telling students that we thought they needed help. It wasn't controlling, so we didn't tell them, here's a persuasive message and you should really believe this. Instead, we said, here's some information we've gathered. We want to know how you think this is true, why this happens, how it's been true for you. It's an active, not a passive experience. So students actually write long essays. They took about 20 minutes to write an essay about why they think the transition to college changes in the way that the upperclassmen had talked about. And then they took those essays and they rewrote them into a speech that they delivered to a video camera that they thought would be shown in freshman orientation in the next year. In future studies, in subsequent studies, we've had students do things like write a letter to a future freshman. There are multiple different control conditions, and I'm just going to combine them. This study was done with African American and European American students in mind. Later research that we've done has involved other groups, including first-generation college students and women in engineering. But in this case, we're looking at African Americans predominantly. They're enrolled in a selective university where they're in the minority. And here's what they said to us immediately after the intervention. They said things like, I learned that I wasn't alone in how I felt at the beginning of the year. It's comforting to see the commonality of experiences across all lines. That should be comforting for incoming students. And I found the similarities between my impression and those of the seniors, juniors uncanny. So the materials that we had created really spoke to our participants, that there was a lot of care and craft that we put into creating those materials and to making them appropriate for the students on that campus, and they were effective in that they really did relate to them. What happened to students' academic performance? In this study, we're looking at GPA because there's not a dropout problem at this particular school. And we're looking at GPA over the course of the 4 years of college. This study was delivered in the spring semester of freshman year, and so we're looking at as an outcome at grades in sophomore, junior, and senior year. First, for the black students who are in the control condition, we see what's really a very troubling kind of flat line. They don't show significant growth over time in college. There's a dip in the middle, there's a recovery, but at the end of college, they're only doing, marginally better than they were doing at the very beginning. By contrast, in the intervention condition, black students term by term gathered momentum as though they were gathering resources they needed to succeed in a challenging academic environment in college. That was a very significant linear trend, which means just that every term they were doing better and better. White students were flat across the two conditions and just showed a modest rise over time in both conditions. So overall, this intervention, which was delivered in 1 hour in students' freshman year, reduced the black-white achievement gap through senior year by 52%. But what's even more important is that it's not so much an effect on just how well students do. It's an effect on their trajectory over time through college. It created a pattern of improvement and growth over time. So if you look at senior year, 3 years after the intervention, the achievement gap was reduced by 79% by the intervention condition. So why did this work? Well, what it did was it freed students from these psychological worries, from this worry that maybe I don't belong, to help them build the kinds of relationships that they needed to succeed in college. So in the first week after the intervention, we administered daily diary surveys to students, where every day we asked students what they were going through, what was happening, and how they were feeling. And what we found in those daily diaries was that students were less likely to view everyday negative events, things like social slights and feelings of, like little feelings of exclusion, getting critical feedback, as proof of a lack of belonging. In subsequent studies, we found that the intervention goes out of the psychological, it goes out of students' heads and into the social environment in powerful ways. So students who received the belonging intervention had told us that they've been able to make more close friends, that they've been able to find mentors more in the first year on campus, that they're more likely to live on campus, they're more likely to join extracurricular groups. And I think all of this makes a lot of sense. If you're less likely, if you're worrying less about whether you belong, if you're worrying less that something bad might happen that might the proof that you don't belong, it's easier to reach out to other people, to connect with them, to talk with friends, to go to professors' office hours. It's easier to become sort of deeply enmeshed within the college environment, socially and academically. And ultimately, that's what's really important if kids are to sustain their engagement and succeed in college, is to be enmeshed in the environment. Okay, I think Mary is going to take over now and take us through the end of the presentation.
Okay, let's see here. Now be my screen. Okay, so thank you, Greg, for introducing social belonging, and thanks to Betty and everybody else who's organized this webinar. So what we did, given the body of research that Greg described, particularly that social belonging intervention, but several others that researchers have conducted over the years, we've identified some core principles in getting this intervention message right and applying those principles in particular to future interventions, which was the UIC intervention that Betty, Greg, and I conducted in the last couple of years. So what are some of those core principles? Well, in particular, it's important to really understand that local context and the difficulties that students are going to experience at your particular institution. So at UIC, for example, there's large numbers of first-generation college students, underrepresented students, whose family has little experience with navigating the demands of college life. These are students who have a lot of financial concerns, many family obligations. They're more likely than the average college student to hold full and part-time jobs, as well as commuting maybe 2 or 3 hours a day in order to attend school when they have classes. So it's really important to understand the local context and tailor the intervention messages to the particular concerns of the students at your institution. The concerns of students at other institutions may not reflect the same concerns of students at your institution, so it's important to get those understandings correct. You want to represent those difficulties once you've distilled them as both normal and temporary. Normal meaning commonly held, and temporary likely to get better over time. Particularly you want to talk about those difficulties in ways that are helpful and not unhelpful for students. So what does that mean? It means really encouraging students to attribute their difficulties to universal, widely held, and temporary factors, as well as acknowledging the real difficulties that may not improve over time. But when it comes to those difficulties that may not improve, you want to constrain their meaning. It's not just you who's experiencing those difficulties. Many students experience those difficulties, and they learn to manage them as they move through the college experience. You want to be sure that the messages that you're sending to students both balance the positive and the negative. You want to validate students' pride that they feel in their school, their enthusiasm about coming to college, their enthusiasm about moving through the trajectory of college. So you want to acknowledge that positivity. You don't want it just to simply be about, everybody has these experiences of concerns about social belonging, or everybody drinks too much on campus, or everybody has problems with balancing work and school, and make that the primary message. You want to balance the positivity as well as the negativity. You want to use counter-stereotypical examples when you describe other students' experiences, making them common and temporary. So that's important because we don't want students to feel targeted specifically based on their social group membership. For example, you might have a member of a majority group on campus who talks about feeling that his high school didn't prepare him well enough for college, and he found professors at the beginning of school a little bit intimidating, right? This provides alternative explanations for instances of bias that might occur in students' everyday lives at college. Those counter-stereotypical examples say, it's not just people like me, it's many people from different groups that have these concerns and experiences. You also want to be careful to watch for easy mistakes that are easy to make when we are starting to create these interventions. So you don't want to make fixed ability references, for example, saying that if you don't have it at the beginning of college, you're unlikely to flourish in that domain, right? So if you're not a math person, you'll never be a math person. We don't want to make those kinds of references. We want to be sure that we avoid bad norms. So set good norms, like everybody finds a niche, instead of bad norms like everybody's miserable, everybody drinks, there's lots of prejudice in the environment, those sorts of things. And you also want to resolve all the negative content that you bring up. If you bring up a negative message, you want to address it, and you want to resolve it in a way that students feel as though over time things are likely to get better. You want to be sure to emphasize growth, that students will grow and improve over time, and that they might grow and learn through struggles. So not that they won't have any struggles in their college experience, but that those struggles are opportunities to learn and grow. In particular, you want to tell diverse stories of growth. Again, maybe using counter-stereotypical examples to tell the different ways in which students grow over time. Maybe in social belonging, maybe learning better strategies to meet new students or to work with faculty or to get involved with research. You also want to represent the timeline of growth very carefully. So especially if dealing with older students, you want to be sure that you make the timeline of improvement that you're anticipating for them through the intervention somewhat vague, so that they don't feel as though it's too late for them, that they've missed the boat, right? So the timeline of growth needs to be described somewhat vaguely so everyone feels as though there's still room and time for the growth to occur. And finally, you just want to be sure that overall we're treating students as strong and not weak or in need of remediation somehow. Greg mentioned that the students in that first social belonging intervention didn't even realize they were part of an intervention, and really involved them as helpers, giving the message to the new first-year class that's going to arrive, rather than a group of students who have these concerns and worries and thus need special attention or remediation around their college experience. So we use these principles to create an intervention at UIC. And these interventions, there were two particular interventions that we used that intervened on two psychological factors. The first one was similar to what Greg's described before, around intervening around students' social belonging in college. The second intervention was more of what we call the purpose intervention, really helping students to attribute the challenges and obstacles that are unique to students at UIC to causes that they can control. A lot of times these challenges and obstacles might undermine their motivation to persist through college, and so we wanted to allow them to harness those challenges and obstacles, creating intrinsic motivation to help them reach their goals, remind them why they are going through the challenges and obstacles in order to help them persist through college. So our psychological intervention at UIC involved 1,477 UIC freshmen, and they participated in the spring semester of their freshman year, and we collaborated with the English department there at UIC to come into one of the required freshman writing and rhetoric courses. During one meeting of this particular course, we came in and delivered the intervention to students there. That means that we visited 100 English class in a 6-week period, and we had 1 hour to deliver the intervention altogether. So what we did was within each classroom meeting, students were randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions. They either received the social belonging intervention, the purpose intervention that really dealt with some of the obstacles and challenges unique to UIC students, as well as or they received the control condition, which was an intervention that talked about study skills and how they change over time. Now, these 3 interventions were randomly assigned, and that's important to note because it allows us to get around issues of self-selection and biased samples. This makes evaluation between the 2 intervention conditions and the control condition possible, so we can evaluate the effectiveness of these interventions. So here's what some of the belonging intervention looked like. They saw summary statistics, as Greg mentioned before, that UIC students had difficulty in the transition to college, worrying whether they belonged, fit in, or would ever be accepted by others at UIC. They also learned that the majority of upperclassmen reported making friends and feeling confident that they belonged at UIC, and that students, professors, and others at UIC accepted them. So they have this change over time in their sense of belonging on campus. They saw representative quotes from juniors and seniors. Now, these were culled from focus groups that we conducted before the intervention with actual junior and senior students at UIC. And what we came to realize was that simply discussing how their sense of belonging or how their purpose in going to college influenced their trajectory over time could possibly be an intervention in and of itself. And we'll return to this point later on at the end of the webinar as to other possible interventions. But we culled these quotes from those focus groups. Here's one quote. When I came to UIC, I was worried that I was different from other students. Everyone seemed so sure it was the right place for them. They seemed so happy here. I wasn't sure I fit in. Sometime after my freshman year, I realized that many people who come to UIC are unsure about whether they fit in. Looking back, it seems funny to me. Now I know that everybody feels different from everybody else when they start. At least in some ways, we all face pretty similar challenges. Since I realized this, I am more comfortable at UIC. I've been able to fully enjoy what life has to offer here. There were many of these quotes attributed to diverse racial and ethnic group individuals, as well as people of different ages. In the purpose condition, this was the second intervention that was conducted. At the same time, students either saw purpose, belonging, or control. In the purpose, they learned that many, if not most, UIC students struggled with difficult obstacles and challenges, but that most upperclassmen learned to manage those challenges by keeping in mind their broader reason or goal for persisting in college. So by reminding yourself why you're going through these challenges, it allows you to sort of persist, to manage them over time. Here's a quote, again, from those focus groups that we used in the actual intervention manipulation. When I first came to UIC, I was really overwhelmed by the course load and the difference in the way things are done from high school. The classes were huge, and I had to work to pay for school, so I had to stay up really late to do my homework. Sometimes it was hard to keep going. I thought I was the only one struggling. Looking back, it seems funny now that I know that everyone feels overwhelmed freshman year. At least in some ways, we all face pretty similar challenges. It's normal. What I learned is that what helps you get through is keeping in mind why you're working so hard. When I'm tired, I think about how I'm working to have a secure future. And again, these sorts of quotes were attributed to a diverse group of students, both in terms of age, gender, and race and ethnicity. So what you see here is that both treatment conditions acknowledge the problem, either belonging and fitting in or facing these challenges and obstacles that might otherwise interfere with school. But we frame those problems as common in the first year, widely held, temporary, and also improving over time. And you see that both treatment conditions offered some strategies, but in particular, the purpose condition gives the strategy of reminding oneself of one's ultimate goal and doing so consistently, and that would allow for persistence over time. Now, after receiving the intervention manipulation, these messages from juniors and seniors, we asked our students to engage in those saying is believing techniques that Greg mentioned earlier. So we had them write a letter to a first-year college student. And here's an example of a student's letter. They say, "Dear UIC freshmen, first of all, I want to say welcome to UIC. I hope your transition is going well. I was just in your shoes last year. If you are nervous and unsure of yourself at UIC, do not panic. Transitioning to college is a tough time for all people. Other freshmen may seem confident and sure of themselves, but truly they are not. At first, the only kid you know is your roommate and maybe a few friends from high school, but trust me, making friends will get easier, a lot easier. I wish you luck with your first year at UIC and hope that you find UIC an enjoyable experience." So you see how students who participated in the intervention were able to harness that message and deliver it to help another student, putting them in the helper position and not a helpee position. Here's a letter to a first-year student written by a student who was in the purpose condition. So they say, "Hello, joining the college life is hard, especially if you don't live on campus. Commuting to UIC can be tough, but remember about 80% of the UIC undergrads commute. It's always difficult to know how your education is going to be paid for, which usually leads students to picking up a part-time job. Getting up early, heading straight to work leaves limited time for schoolwork. However, you need to remind yourself that your education is the most important aspect of your life. Keep reminding yourself of that and keep moving forward. Everyone has a bad day, even a horrible week, but it always shows us exactly what we can and can't handle. Don't forget to feel free to ask for help if you need it. Best wishes, our participant." So here are some of the initial results that we found, and this is change in GPA from the fall pre-intervention to the next spring in their freshman year. And this is whether the change in GPA is significantly different from 0. And you see that there's a boost in GPA both in the belonging condition and the purpose condition relative to the control condition. And when we look at this for racial and ethnic minorities compared to white students, we find that these belonging and purpose interventions are actually boosting GPA for both groups. Though specifically in that belonging intervention, we see that the effect is greater for more at-risk students, such as underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students, who might be particularly concerned about belonging on the college campus. So what we're doing now is we're conducting follow-up studies and surveys of this group of students, examining the psychological processes and mechanisms that might explain this change over time. And again, we're collecting all of the grades in GPA in each semester to see the degree to which these boosts in GPA persist. This has involved a really excellent long-term commitment by UIC, the university, and really fantastic working relationships between the administration at UIC, particularly Dr. Bottoms, and us, the psychology researchers. So how might you create this intervention for yourself if you're interested in doing something like this on your campus? Well, we see that these social psychological interventions really depend on two types of expertise. It's critical to understand the local context. What are students actually concerned about? When are they concerned about it? And then the psychology is important to understand. What strategies psychologically might we use to address those concerns that's not going to create reactance to the message, right? How are we best going to target those particular concerns in a way that won't backfire, that won't show reactance? And we need to have these genuine interdisciplinary collaborations that are both going to affect education and student outcomes, as well as contribute to the body of knowledge about how best to do this scientifically. Now, there's some basic guidelines we put together here. Much of them target some of the core principles in creating positive intervention messages we've talked about before. You'll also have a handout that comes with this webinar that describes some of these basic guidelines in more detail. So you definitely want to target a specific psychological process, whether it be about belief about belonging or concerns in terms of obstacles and challenges like commuting or holding a lot of jobs or having family commitments that are perceived to be barriers to success and that can affect students over time. You want to deliver your intervention message in powerful ways, actively, not passively. For example, using the saying is believing technique, either through videos or through letters to first-year students. You want the message to be non-stigmatizing and non-controlling. If students feel as though they're the target of remediation messages, it's likely that these interventions won't be taken to heart in the same way. If they feel as though you're trying to control what they do in the future, you're likely to see reactance. You need to engineer these messages for your particular context. Now, there's several intervention opportunities in college. You might be wondering, when is the best time to deliver some of these interventions? Well, there's lots of opportunities where students might be concerned with particular psychological worries. So pre-major advising, when they're trying to choose which discipline is for them, is a good time to intervene. Intervene when they are in class, the way that we did at UIC. Intervene when they're considering gateway courses, like gateway courses when it comes to taking a STEM major. You might intervene when it comes to residential dormitory activities. In the dorms, students are gathered. It's a right place to introduce some of these ideas as dorm activities for a floor, for example. You might intervene at critical moments. For example, when students are given academic warnings or probation, now they have some negative outcome that might need reinterpretation, right? That might need attributions in a way that's going to lift them rather than depress them as they move forward through their college experience. And also, we've had some success with intervening with pre-orientation online materials. So here, when students are really excited about going to college, they're moving from high school to college, it's an ideal time to establish the expectations that you want them to have coming into college about the degree to which they may experience some of these concerns and the fact that it will get better over time. So I'll just quickly give you some ideas. I think this is one place that colleges are particularly interested in intervening, and it's ideal in many ways for reasons I'll describe in a moment. This was a 45-minute high school intervention. It was done in collaboration with a high school charter school network, and students participated in this online intervention in May of their senior year of high school, right as they were about ready to anticipate the college trajectory here, entering college. And what happened was they saw the social belonging intervention online, and then the measure that we were interested in looking to see whether or not it affected outcomes was particularly college enrollment. From the first semester of college and the second semester of college, they have continuous college full-time enrollment over time. Now, this is the full-time enrollment, continuous enrollment from freshman year, starting from high school to college, and then from the college first semester to the second semester of college. And you see that only 39% of students from this charter high school network showed continuous college enrollment the next year. There was also a randomized control where students received a control condition intervention, and you can see again it's not much different than not receiving any intervention. But when it comes to the social belonging intervention, you see a marked increase in continuous full-time enrollment of students from one semester to the next in their first year of college. Now this can be compared to other interventions. There's particularly one that's gotten a lot of media coverage as to giving students financial incentives to continue on through college. There was one in particular that gave students $3,500 for going to college and persisting in college. And we can see here that the social belonging intervention actually produces an effect that is 6.8 times larger than the effect of simply offering students money to continue through college. So we see the social belonging intervention is powerful and relative to others, less expensive and more effective. So how can you do this on your campus? You want to adapt interventions for your campus, as I've said before. You want to be very careful when it comes to those messages. Make sure that whenever possible, you are able to test these new strategies out experimentally first. That's where the collaboration with social scientists would be particularly useful, social psychologists in particular. Now we provided these materials to you as part of the webinar. Adrienne sent them before the webinar, and also she'll be sending them later. They'll also be archived at the location where the webinar is archived, so you can access them at any time. You'll definitely want to use carefully structured discussion groups to bring out the key themes related to the college transition. This was done both in the high school charter school, where they really worked with students over a period of a week to be sure that they were getting the message exactly right for the high school audience. There's been college interventions that have taken place pre-orientation. Now we think that pre-orientation is a really special place to intervene, mostly because college students are so excited about going to college at that moment, right? They aren't distracted by the everyday struggles of college life, and so they're particularly receptive to the message then. The university is always oftentimes at that point requiring students to fill out information online. Maybe it's health record information, maybe it's roommate selection questionnaires, and so adding a 30 to 45-minute intervention at that point, it's pretty convenient to do and to get the whole student body on board. Also, when you do it online, when you do these interventions online, the system can make randomization happen automatically, which makes evaluation pretty simple. So that pre-orientation evaluation and interventions are really nice. If you'd like to join with us in partnership to develop and test these pre-orientation interventions, we are currently developing ways to customize interventions for particular campuses, for specific schools, and we are willing to join with other schools around the country to test their effects and see if they're effective on your campus. So if you or your campus would be interested in working with us on these, please contact us. We'd be happy to discuss more. And that concludes our presentation. For now, we'd really like to open it up for more discussion. Our contact information is here. You'll also be able to receive, again, those materials that we provided and links to the actual academic articles, and also materials about how to create group discussions on your campus around these to create intervention materials as part of the webinar. So with that, I will turn it back over to Adrian and Betty Bottoms, who I believe will join us for questions and answers.
I can't. Hi. So we're going to look at the questions from the audience now, and I'll repeat them. So let me see if I can get to this question. Okay. Someone says, is this intervention applicable at younger ages, such as high school or middle school, when similar issues may also impact grades and retention? Mary?
Yes, so let's see. I think Greg is also muted, so maybe we want to unmute Greg. There he is. Greg, do you want to address this one?
Yeah, sure. There's been lots of success with younger ages, but the interventions themselves obviously have to be age appropriate, and that changes the actual form of them. But we have done the belonging intervention with middle school students, and growth mindset and purpose interventions have both been done with high school students with great success, as well as with community college students. I think that there's something different about pre-adolescents. I think that the processes are rather different there, but from middle school up, I think that there are some broad similarities, but the materials need to be very much age appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. The next question is this. Could you say more about how you adapted the intervention to different contexts or challenges that students are facing? Not all cohorts may face the same challenges or conditions.
That's right. I agree with that question 100%, that it's important to adapt these contexts and challenges. So what we've done in the past is really we've taken the previous cohort of students, just the year before, and we've had them come into focus groups, and we've asked them, what are the challenges that you've encountered? Describe how those challenges have changed over time. And then we can see sort of the narratives of students and their experiences over time, so that we're giving freshman students a realistic view of both what students are concerned about, as well as how how they can anticipate change over time. Many times what we'll do for interventions is we'll take a small subset of students from that particular year and create materials around their particular concerns and relate those concerns to what some of the juniors and seniors say. So then you're not worried so much about cohort problems because the concerns are coming directly from the same cohort that you'll be intervening upon. Do you have more to say on this, Greg?
The only thing I would say, add to that, I think that's all right, is that the discussion group called Coming to College that we've distributed is a way it's a way to have people come together and talk in which these issues and concerns bubble up more naturally. And so you don't have to anticipate exactly what the specific challenges are in a specific context. So it has that nice property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there anything that you implemented that caused you problems or that didn't work?
Yes, we've definitely had mud on our face before. Yeah, we have an intervention here at Stanford with an introductory physics class, which is a major gateway to STEM majors at Stanford. And we did a belonging intervention that was effective. We also did a second intervention that was designed to change how students interacted in group work to improve, the goal was to improve women's experiences, and it didn't work the way that we had anticipated by any means. I think that these processes and how people think about school and their experience in school, these keystone beliefs are really powerful, and that's one of the reasons why it's very important to test things with a randomized basis.
Right, and we've also been made aware of other interventions that have been tried at different college campuses where, for example, there was a video made that really tried to normalize some of the college students' experiences. However, they focused so much on the negative and didn't really give the narrative about change and growth over time. Everybody was experiencing these concerns, and it was problematic. So they got the part about belonging and having the concerns be widely held, but they lost out on some of those growth messages that should also always accompany those belonging problem messages.
Yeah,
So,
I would just add to what Mary was saying. You know, when I went to college, it was very much a kind of rah, 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 school spirit kind of orientation process. It was very sort of high arousal, positive affect. We're so excited to be here. And one of the points of the belonging intervention is that is not that helpful if it's not balanced, because you lose, you make people think that they should always have positive experiences, and then when something bad happens, they think, you know, they're not prepared for it. They think, I don't know why this is happening. Maybe I'm the only one who's having something difficult. And of course, we know the transition to college is extremely difficult, and everybody's going to have problems one way or another. So the folks who created this video were excited to try to address that, but in doing that, they didn't create the message in a nuanced way that I think is really important. And it left them. It left the message. It left you thinking, you know, is this place just a miserable place? Are people just unhappy here? And so I think the nuances are really important, as Mary is saying.
Great, thank you. We've got about 4 minutes left, so this is probably the last question we can take. But have you considered the use of the first-year student's imagined future self as mentor to the current self regarding social belonging and purpose, by reflecting upon their prior transitions, such as from 8th grade to high school?
Yes, that's a great question. So can you ask students to reflect on their past, to reflect on the growth of their past, and to allow them to harness that as they anticipate going forward in their college experiences? We actually did that as part of the UIC intervention immediately following their receiving of the information from the juniors and seniors about the message of, you know, commonness of their concerns and growth of their concerns. We actually had them describe how in the past they've had some experiences that might be similar to them as preparation for writing their letter to a first-year student. So we asked them to think about those times where they saw growth in themselves when it came to social belonging, or when they had obstacles or challenges in the past that they were able to surmount. Here, then, we ask them to describe those particular challenges and incorporate those messages of belonging or purpose in the letter to the first-year student. And so I think that's definitely a strategy that is likely to help students at least take in the intervention message and make it relevant to the self.
I would just add that is especially important in pre-enrollment messaging. So when we do the interventions before students actually have come to campus and they don't actually have experience with the college transition actually having happened yet, because it hasn't actually happened yet, they're just anticipating it. Those kinds of techniques are especially helpful to think back on your transition to high school or to other important transitions we've gone through.
Okay, well, thank you both. Sherry, did you want to say anything?
No, I just wanted to thank all of you for putting together this absolutely fantastic webinar. I think we all learned a lot from the experience. I will just let everyone know we did record it. We usually clean it up, but then we'll make it available on the website, and we'll include the also wonderful supportive materials that Greg and Mary pulled together for support for this. And we will send those out again. So again, I just want to thank everybody and thank our speakers. You did a great job.
Yeah, and thanks to the audience for joining us. And I invite everyone to share the link once everything is posted with other people at your universities who might be able to work in some of the ways that we have suggested. So thanks, and thanks to USU for organizing this, and to the presenters.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, thanks everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. We'll be turning everything off now. So.
Great. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Bye.